Easter, 1900. 45 meters down, off a small Greek island called Antikythera, a sponge diver named Elias Stadiatis is hauling for the surface. He has just seen a heap of bodies. That is what it looks like in the silt and the bad light. Dead men and dead horses on the bottom of the sea. They get him up and out of the helmet, and he can barely speak, so the captain, Dimitrios Kondos, goes down to see for himself. The bodies are not bodies, they are statues. Bronze men and marble horses scattered where a ship went down 2,000 years ago. Sheltering from a storm, the crew have found a wreck. For a year, the Navy works the wreck, deeper and longer than any body should bear. One diver, Georgos Kritikos, dies of it. 2 more are paralyzed. And set down among the statues is one green lump the size of a book, encrusted, shapeless, no different from any other piece of junk a wreck gives up. No one looks at it twice. It goes to a museum in Athens, and it is set on a shelf. It will sit there for 50 years before anyone understands that it is the most advanced machine to survive from the ancient world. And even then, it will not tell them who made it. So what is it? Who cut these gears, and why does the record hold no other like them for 1,000 years? How does a corroded box of bronze name the year and the hour an eclipse will fall? This is the story of a sponge diver, a lump of bronze, and 1,000 years of silence. The statues were the prize. They went on display. They were what the dives had been for, what a man had died for, the bronze and the marble of a sunken ship. This recovery was, in fact, one of the first times anyone had systematically excavated an ancient shipwreck. But that distinction belongs to the statues. The lump was just there with them, brought up in the same nets, logged in the same lists. So the lump waited. It dried out in the museum air, and as it dried, it began to crack, the way waterlogged bronze does when you take it out of the sea after 2,000 years. A piece of it came away. On the 17th of May 1902, an archaeologist at the museum named Valerios Stais was looking at the pieces of the broken lump. In one of them, under the light, he saw something that did not belong. Teeth. The fine, even teeth of a gear wheel cut into bronze. A gear, inside a thing that had been on the seabed since before the Romans took Greece. This is not what a shipwreck is supposed to give you. You expect cups, coins, anchors, the bones of statues. You do not expect machinery. Gears like these, small and precise and meshing, would not appear again anywhere in the record for at least 1,000 years. So Stais could see it. He could hold the gear in his hand and turn it in the light. What he could not do was read it. No one could say what the thing had been, or who had cut these teeth, or why there was a machine like this in a Greek wreck 100 years before the birth of Christ. Most of the guesses were that it could not be what it looked like. Some thought it must have fallen in later, that it had drifted down from some more recent age and only landed among the old bronze by accident. The gear was simply too much. So the fragment went back to the museum, and for the better part of 50 years it was largely left alone. The single most advanced machine to survive from the ancient world sat in a case in Athens, catalogued, occasionally dusted, and essentially ignored. You could have walked past it on an afternoon and read the little label and moved on to the statues, which is more or less what almost everyone did. So let us be plain about what they had, because it is the heart of this story. They had a wooden case, about the size of a large book, roughly 34 centimeters tall, 18 across, 9 deep. Inside that case were bronze plates. On the outside were dials, one on the front and more on the back. And behind the plates, packed into a space the size of a thick paperback, were gears, bronze gears, cut by hand, meshing with each other. The largest of them is about the size of a saucer. The smallest are smaller than a coin. What survived the sea was not the whole machine. It came to the museum as one corroded mass, and over the years of drying and conservation, it broke into pieces. 82 of them in the end, 7 large and the rest small. Most of the gearing is gone. What is left is fragments. But the fragments hold gears, and the gears hold teeth, and the teeth can be counted. And they had it. The whole problem from that day in 1902 onward was never that the object was lost or buried or out of reach. It was in a museum in Athens. You could walk up to the case and look at it. The problem was reading it. They had the answer the entire time. They just had no way yet to make it speak. A few years later, around 1905, a German scholar named Albert Rehm did something no one had managed before. He read it. Not the gears, the writing, because there was writing on the object, tiny Greek letters engraved into the bronze plates, most of them eaten by corrosion, a few of them still legible. Rehm worked at the scraps, and from the scraps he made the first correct guess about what the thing was. It was, he realized, an astronomical machine, a device for calculating the movements of the heavens. And he saw, in the broken text, a rhythm, a cycle of 19 years. That number is older than the machine. The Greeks knew it, and the Babylonians before them. 19 years is very nearly a whole number of months. Set a calendar by the sun and a calendar by the moon, and they drift apart. But wait 19 years, and they fall back into step. The Greeks called that the Metonic cycle. What matters is what it does. It is the gear that keeps the sun's calendar and the moon's calendar married, over 19 years in a box you can hold. Rehm got the intuition right, and then the trail went cold. He had the idea, but he did not have the tools to read the rest of the object, and neither did anyone else of his generation. He died without seeing the inside of it. He had read one word of a sentence 2,000 years long. The next person to take the object seriously arrived half a century later. In 1951, a Yale historian of science named Derek de Solla Price began studying the fragments. He was not a Greek archaeologist. He was a man who cared about old instruments and how they worked. And he became convinced that this corroded lump was something extraordinary. An ancient astronomical calculator, a kind of machine for the sky. In 1959, he wrote about it for a popular science magazine, and for the first time, the object had a public. People who had never heard of Antikythera now knew there was a 2,000-year-old machine sitting in Athens with gears inside it. The thing that had been ignored on a shelf for half a century suddenly had a name in the world. But Price had the same problem everyone before him had. The gears he wanted to understand were locked inside corroded bronze, fused together by 20 centuries in the sea. He could not take the object apart without destroying it. He could turn the fragments in his hands and stare at the surfaces, and the surfaces only showed him the outermost wheels. The rest were buried in the green mass, layer behind layer, invisible. So, in 1971, working with a Greek physicist named Charalampos Karakalos, he did the only thing left to do. He shot radiation through it. X-rays and gamma rays fired through the metal, throwing shadows of the hidden gears onto film. For the first time, someone was looking inside the object without breaking it. And again, in the pattern that runs through this whole story, there was no new dig. No one went back to the seabed. The object had not changed. What changed was the way of looking at the thing they already had. Price read more than anyone before him. He proved the calendar gearing was real. The 19-year cycle Rehm had only guessed at was there, in bronze, in the train of wheels. That much he got right, and it was a genuine achievement. He also got things wrong. His count of the gears was off. His picture of how the device handled the wandering stars, the planets, turned out to be mistaken in important ways. And the people who came after him would have to take his reconstruction apart and build it again from better evidence. That is not a knock on Price. He was working from shadows on film, reading a machine through a fog. He got the heart of it right and the edges wrong, which is about as much as the tools of his lifetime allowed. People sometimes say Price solved the Antikythera mechanism. He did not. He read part of it, and he misread part of it, and he handed it forward, further along than he found it, and still far from done. The object let him see the calendar and kept the rest to itself. By the turn of this century, the person closest to the object was not in a university at all. His name was Michael Wright, and he was a museum curator and a horologist, a man who understood old clocks and the gears inside them. And Wright did something that sounds almost stubborn. To find out whether the machine could have worked the way he thought it did, he built one. By hand, at a bench, he cut the gears in brass and assembled them, testing the idea against the resistance of real metal. This was the way a clockmaker works, not the way most historians do. A historian argues on paper. Wright argued in metal. If a train of gears would not turn, or jammed, or would not produce the motion the sky demands, the bench would tell him at once, in a way no diagram could. He spent years on it, building and rebuilding. He worked alone, apart from the research effort gathering around the object. And Wright became convinced of something the surviving evidence could not yet prove. He believed the front of the device, the part most badly lost, had carried a moving model of the planets. Not just the sun and the moon, but the 5 wandering stars the Greeks could see turning on the face of the machine. This was an argument, not a reading. The gearing for it had not survived. Wright was reasoning from what was left to what must have been, and building models to see whether the idea even held together mechanically. Other scholars were not all convinced. What he was after was not how the teeth meshed. That he could work out at the bench. What he was after was a question about the object itself. Had this thing once shown you the planets? The surviving metal would not yet answer him. To get further, you would need to see inside the fragments far more clearly than an X-ray plate allowed. You would need a machine that no museum owned. In 2005, an international team brought one to Athens. The machine they rolled in weighed about 8 tons. It had been built to look inside the metal blades of jet engines, to find the cracks and flaws hidden in solid steel. They turned it on a corroded lump the size of a book. It was a strange thing to bring together. The team was an international one. astronomers and historians and imaging engineers from Britain and Greece and beyond, working alongside the people who built the scanner. They had to crate the fragments out of their cases and into the path of a machine designed for factory floors. And they had perhaps a few weeks with it. Then they pointed 8 tons of industrial imaging at a corroded fragment they could close one hand around. What the scanner did was cut the object into slices, not physically, but in image. Hundreds of thin cross-sections, each one a clean view straight through the bronze, of gears and teeth and writing that no human eye had been able to resolve since the thing went into the sea. Alongside it, they used another technique, a way of lighting the surface from many angles and combining the images, so that letters too shallow and too worn to see by eye lifted up off the metal and became readable. And the team sat and watched the slices come up. Out of the corrosion, line by line, came text. Greek letters that no one had read in 2,000 years. The legible writing on the object more than doubled in a matter of weeks. They could count the gears now, properly. 30 of them survived inside the fragments, 27 packed into a single piece. And from those, the team could reconstruct a machine of around 37 meshing wheels, where before there had been mostly guesses. And tooth by tooth, word by word, the object began to explain itself. The object had not moved. It had been in that same museum, in that same city, for over 100 years. No one had gone anywhere or dug anything up. What had finally arrived was not the object. It was the ability to read it. And once it had been read, what the slices and the text said together is the most astonishing thing in this story. So, what the box does. Every part of this is read off the surviving bronze. None of it is a guess. You turn a crank on the side, and as you turn it, the dials move the way the real sky moves. Start on the front. There is a dial there, a great ring marked twice over. Around the outside, the 12 months of the year. Just inside them, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the band of stars the sun walks through. And across both rings move 2 pointers, one for the sun, one for the moon. Turn the crank a little, and a day goes by, and the sun creeps along its ring, while the moon hurries around faster, the way it does in the real sky. Turn it a little more, and the seasons come round, and the sun stands where the real sun would stand against the real stars on that day. There was even a small ball set into the face to show the phase of the moon, one half of it dark and one half light, slowly turning as the model sun and the model moon drew apart and came back together. So at any turn of the handle, you could read off the front 3 things at once: where the sun stood among the stars, where the moon stood, and whether that moon would be a thin crescent or a full bright disk that night. That alone would be a marvel, a pocket of the heavens kept honest against the real sky on a table in a room. But the front is only the face of it. Turn the object over. On the back are the dials that took a century to read, and they are stranger and larger than the front. The upper one is that 19-year calendar, the sun's year and the moon's months held in step. It is not a simple ring, it is a spiral, a groove that winds around 5 times, and a little pointer rides along it, tracking the months as the years go by, working its way out from the centre, turn after turn. 19 years laid out as a single winding path you follow with your eye. And the makers were not satisfied even with that. Tucked inside the 19-year spiral is a smaller dial, and it runs for 76 years, 4 times 19. The Greeks had noticed that even the 19-year cycle drifts a fraction loose over a lifetime, and that stacking 4 of them together tightens it back up. The main calendar is the 19-year cycle. The 76-year dial sits enclosed within it, quietly correcting it. So this is a box of bronze keeping a calendar that runs longer than most of the lives around it, and then keeping a finer calendar to catch the error in the first one. A correction folded inside a correction. And then it does something subtler still. The moon does not cross the sky at an even speed. We see it move night to night against the stars, and at one part of its path it runs a little quicker, and at another it slows and seems almost to dawdle. This is real. It is one of the first irregularities anyone ever teased out of the heavens, centuries of patient watching written down as numbers. The Greeks knew it, the Babylonians knew it before them, and the box knows it too. Inside it, a clever pair of gears makes the model moon on the front run fast and then slow, speeding and dragging, exactly the way the real moon does through its month. It does not just walk the moon evenly around its dial, which would have been far simpler to build. It walks the moon wrong, in precisely the way the real moon is wrong. A flaw in the heavens, copied faithfully into bronze. Someone cared enough about getting the moon right to build in the place where the moon is least simple. And then, almost as an afterthought, there is the human grace note. One small dial on the back does not track the heavens at all, it tracks the games. Every few years, the Greek world gathered for its great athletic festivals, and this one dial named 6 of them. There was Olympia. There were the contests in the years between, the Pythian games at Delphi, the Isthmian at Corinth, the Nemean at Nemea. And then 2 that reach further out than you would expect. The Na, held far up in the northwest at the old oracle of Zeus at Dodona. And the Helea, held out on the island of Rhodes off the coast of Asia. So the same dial that sat beside the calendars of the heavens kept the games of the whole Greek world, from Olympia in the south, to Dodona in the far north, to Rhodes across the sea. You turn the same crank that moves the bodies of the sky and predicts the darkening of the sun, and a pointer quietly tells you that this is a year of the games. The turning of the heavens and the calendar of foot races and wrestling came off the same handle in the same box. Whoever built this thought the games of the whole Greek world belonged in a model of the cosmos. And then there is the dial that is the reason this object is famous. The lower dial on the back is another spiral, and it runs a cycle of 223 months, a little over 18 years. That number is one of the oldest hard-won secrets of the sky. The Babylonians had found, by watching and recording for generations, that eclipses repeat on that exact rhythm. Line up the sun and the moon and the 2 points where the moon's tilted path crosses the sun's, and the whole arrangement drifts apart, and then, 223 months later, comes back around, near enough to bring another eclipse. The machine has that rhythm cut into its gears. So set the machine. Turn the crank forward, month by month, year by year, into a future no one has seen yet. The little pointer winds its way along the spiral, and in a particular month, far ahead, it reaches a small glyph engraved on the groove, a mark with a few Greek letters beside it. Read the letters, and the box tells you what is coming. Whether it will be the sun that darkens or the moon, the month it will fall in, the hour of the day or the hour of the night, you should expect it. And it does not stop there. In the worn shorthand of the glyphs there is more, a note of how deep the shadow will run, whether the disk will be half-eaten or wholly swallowed, and even, on some of them, what colour the darkened face may turn. The ancients knew that a moon in eclipse does not simply go black. It can flush red or brown or grey. Someone thought that worth recording in advance on a dial. And there is a refinement even on top of that. Tucked beside the eclipse spiral is one more small dial that runs for 54 years, 3 of the 18-year cycles laid end to end. The 18-year rhythm brings the eclipse back, but a third of a day out each time, so the next one falls some hours later in the turning of the Earth. This little dial holds that slip. It tells you to add 8 hours, or 16, to land the prediction on the right part of the day. A correction to the hour folded inside the prediction of the eclipse. So gather it together. A hand-cranked box of bronze, naming the kind of eclipse, the month it falls in, the hour of the day or night, how deep it will run, and the colour the shadow may turn. Years before it happens. Not guessed, not prophesied by a priest reading omens, computed on the turn of a handle and read straight off the surviving metal. Now, none of this is knowledge from nowhere. Every single function in the box maps onto astronomy the Greeks and the Babylonians already had. The 19-year calendar, the 18-year eclipse rhythm, none of it is secret. All of it is written in plain numbers in records that survive. No one needed magic, and no one needed help from anywhere. So the wonder is not that someone knew the sky. People knew the sky. Astronomers had spent centuries pulling these cycles out of the dark, one patient night at a time. The wonder is that someone took all of it, the whole inherited learning of the heavens, and compressed it into something you could hold under one arm. Cut it into bronze, by hand, this small and this exact, so that turning a single handle would run every one of those cycles at once and keep them all in step. That is the staggering part, not the knowing, the packing of the knowing into metal. It does exactly what they already knew how to do. That is the whole shock of it. And there is a last marvel, the quietest of them, that ties all the others together. Every motion in the box comes from one place, the sun creeping, the moon hurrying and slowing, the calendars winding out their spirals, the eclipse pointer reaching its glyph far in the future, all of it driven by a single handle on the side, one input. And out of that one turning, the whole sky moves at once, each part at its own different speed, the fast moon and the slow sun and the slower calendars, every one of them landing where it should against all the others. The heavens do not run on one speed. The box does not either. One hand and the whole cosmos turns. Which raises a quieter question. What was it for? Not in the abstract. Concretely, who would want such a thing, and what would they do with it? It is not a tool a sailor needs, or a farmer, or a priest fixing the date of a festival. Those people had simpler ways to know what they needed to know. This is something else. It is the whole moving heavens gathered into a box you could carry under one arm and set on a table. The most careful reading we have is that it was a teaching object and a showpiece, a thing to demonstrate, to wonder at, to explain the cosmos with. Turn the crank, and here is how the sun, the moon, and the wandering stars actually move. Here is when the next eclipse comes. Here is the order of the heavens made small and turned by a human hand. Something a wealthy household might own, or a school of philosophy might keep, the way a great library kept its scrolls. That reading is persuasive rather than proven. We are inferring the purpose from the object and from what we know of its world, not reading it off a label. But the Romans who saw such machines felt exactly that wonder, and they wrote it down. One Roman poet looked at a sphere of this kind and saw a small image of the vast vault of heaven. A later poem marvels that inside one of them a false zodiac runs through a year of its own, and a toy moon waxes and wanes month by month. A small false heaven, keeping its own time, on a table in a room. That is what the people who held one understood it to be. Not a calculator in our sense, a cosmos you could hold. 2,000 years before that scanner, a Roman named Cicero wrote down something that matters here. He was describing a machine, a bronze globe, he said, that had been carried back to Rome generations earlier from the sack of the Greek city of Syracuse. You turned it, and it showed the sun and the moon and the 5 wandering stars, all moving as they move in the heavens. And on this globe, Cicero wrote, the same eclipse of the sun happened on the globe as would actually happen in the sky. That is the same thing our box does, an eclipse reproduced by a machine before it happens. And Cicero names another one, not an antique carried home as plunder, but a recent thing made in his own lifetime by a Greek scholar named Posidonius, a working machine of the heavens built by a contemporary. So these objects were real, they existed, more than one of them, in the Greek and Roman world, a living tradition of building the sky in metal. There is a name people reach for here, and it is worth setting down why it does not fit. Cicero's plundered globe was credited to Archimedes, the great engineer of Syracuse, and so people want Archimedes to have built our machine too. But Archimedes died in 212 BC, generations before our object was made. No inscription on it bears his name, or anyone's. He built spheres of the heavens. He did not build this one. What Cicero gives us is not a maker. It is something quieter and stranger. He tells us, in plain Latin, that there were others. This kind of machine was a known thing, made by more than one hand, talked about in Rome. We have his word that the tradition existed. We do not have one of the machines, not Archimedes's globe, not Posidonius's. Out of a whole tradition Cicero saw with his own eyes, the sea handed back exactly one. Come back to the object itself, and to what its own writing says. Because it does carry writing. Thousands of characters engraved across its plates, most of them now read. It is, in a sense, partly its own document. It explains its own dials. It names cycles and months and the festivals of the games. And in all of that text, on all of those plates, there is not one signature, not a maker, not an owner, not a single "I made this." It is not silent about where it comes from. The names of the months engraved on its calendar are Corinthian, the months used by Corinth and the cities Corinth founded. That points toward a particular cultural world, perhaps Syracuse in Sicily, perhaps the northwest of Greece. Other clues have led scholars toward the island of Rhodes, toward the circle of astronomers who worked there. But every road runs out at the same kind of place. It ends at a region and a generation and a workshop we cannot find. We can say roughly where, we can say roughly when, we cannot say who. Even the when will not quite sit still. The astronomy built into that eclipse dial may reach back to a particular full moon in the year 205 BC, as if the design were calibrated to a sky from that year. But the physical object, the bronze itself, looks about a century younger. It was made somewhere in the range of 150 to 60 BC. The mathematics inside it may be older than the metal around it. That is as close as the date will come. We can read almost everything the object says. It says nothing about who said it. The back of the machine we now understand. The calendar dials and the eclipse dial have been read off the surviving bronze, and the people on screen in this story read them. The front is mostly gone. We are nearly certain there was more there than the sun and the moon. The evidence and the writing both point to a display of the planets, those 5 wandering stars turning on the face of the device. The inscriptions on the object even name the long periods of some of those planets, the numbers of years it takes their motions to come round again. But the gearing that would have driven them across the face of the machine did not survive. It is the most badly lost part of the whole object, and of everything the maker had to capture, the planets are the hardest. Because a planet does not move evenly across the sky. Watch one over months, and it appears to slow, stop, and even drift backward against the stars before going on again. Showing that strange, wandering motion in bronze is a far harder problem than tracking the steady sun. Whatever the maker built to solve it is exactly the part the sea took. In 2021, the team that had run the scanner proposed a full reconstruction of that lost front, a model of the cosmos, the sun and moon and all 5 planets turning together. And one piece of it is genuinely anchored. There is a small surviving gear with 63 teeth, and they were able to tie it, through the device's own engraved numbers, to the long cycle of the planet Venus. They matched it to a period the inscriptions themselves name. One of the team describing it said they had managed to match the evidence for a Venus mechanism, the 63-tooth gear playing the crucial part. One planet, then, anchored in surviving metal and surviving text, that much is real. But most of the rest of that front is reconstruction, not preserved gearing. It is the team reasoning elegantly from what survives to what must have been there. And the elegant model does not hold all the way. Run it forward, and the pointer for Mars walks off the truth. In their own simulation, it can stand 38 degrees away from where the planet actually is in the sky. 38 degrees is most of a season's worth of sky. The most beautiful reconstruction we have, and at its hardest planet, it misses by that much. The full model first appeared as a preprint, ahead of formal review. The team's leader called it the first model that conforms to all the physical evidence. That is the team's own claim about their own reconstruction of a part of the object that is still argued over. It is the leading idea for what the front was. It is not a verdict, and it is not the moment someone solved the Antikythera mechanism. It is the honest edge of the investigation, the place we are still reading. And it points at a sharper question than the one it tries to answer. We cannot fully read the front of the single device we have. So why is there a single device at all? Why only one? So, why only one? The hype answer is that the knowledge was lost, that some advanced thing flickered into the world and was snuffed out or hidden or forgotten. The honest answer is quieter and harder. Bronze was valuable. For most of the centuries since this machine was made, an old bronze object was not a treasure to be kept. It was metal to be melted down and used again. This is why so few large ancient bronzes survive at all. The great bronze statues we do have tend to be the ones that were lost the way these were, dropped into the sea in a shipwreck, out of reach of anyone who would have melted them. The overwhelming majority went into the fire and came out as coins or armour or new statues, again and again down the centuries. A small geared machine, broken or out of date, its purpose forgotten, would have been worth exactly what its metal weighed. It would have gone into the crucible like anything else, and no one would have thought it a loss. And there is a second part to it. Machines like this were probably always rare. One scholar put it well. These were objects few in number, heard of by many, but seen, let alone touched, by almost no one. Luxury showpieces, things a wealthy household or a school might own one of, that most people would only ever hear about, the way Cicero heard about the globe in Rome. Put those two facts beside each other. The tradition existed. Cicero saw it. And one-off luxury bronze almost never survived 2,000 years of being worth more as scrap. That is why there is only one. And that is the same shape as the front we cannot fully rebuild. We are not missing the answer. We know, broadly, what this thing was and what it did. What we are missing is the ordinary world around it, the other instruments, the workshop it came out of, the name of the person who cut the teeth, the things that would have made this object unremarkable. What did not survive is not lost superscience, it is the ordinariness. We do not know who made it. We do not know why it is alone. We cannot fully reconstruct its face. And none of that is a failure of the looking. We have looked harder at this object than at almost anything else from its world. Those gaps are just the shape of what the sea gave back. It is not a machine that should not exist. It is the last one left of a kind we can no longer see. It is still there, in a case in Athens, in cold, neutral light, the same green lump. For more than 100 years we have held the whole of it. Every person in this story bent over it and read a little more. The gear under Stias's lens, the calendar in Rehm's broken text, Price's shadows on film, Wright's gears cut in brass, the text the 8-ton scanner pulled out of the corrosion. Each of them read further than the last. Each handed it forward, still unfinished. And we have now read almost all of it. We know what it computed. We know it did exactly what its century already knew how to do, in bronze, by hand, to a precision nothing else from that world preserves. It still names no maker. It still has no twin. The obstacle was never that we could not reach the answer. We held the answer the entire time. The silence is not a gap in what we can see. It is the answer. It came up out of the dark as a lump no one looked at twice, and it is still, in the end, the only one.